While I'll be quick with this, there's interesting things to be said of the failure of this game's backtracking design. It's somewhat unforgivable in a 4 to 6 hour game that most of the time is spent revisiting old areas without real purpose, but you could also suppose it makes the colony feel like a real place and fleshes it out. Enemies are using the shaft, microwave tech used to prevent carbon emissions, to create a gameplay barrier for the player to perform busy work around. There's an offhand remark that the shaft's microwave field seems to be causing huge civilian casualties, likely as they boil alive in their own homes. First of all, shooting the shaft. Energy weapons don't work, so primitive physical projectiles it is. Despite a lack of anything else, the reasons for backtracking at least add to the sci-fi setting and draw you into the logic of this world's technology. One of the 6 available areas you've previously been contains a random cutscene. The game has tried to pan the camera here several times suspiciously, as if implying there's anything relevant at all. The implication seems to be the downed Lev or Raptor had the primitive weapon. But if that's the case, the game could have given Leo more characterization by having the weapon be located at the Lev that crushed his friends in the intro. More dialogue could have arose between him and Salvis about what happened and possibly endear the player during this dearth of narrative. The sniper is being hidden by porters, which are a pain in the ass to shoot without using the sniper. These porters use Metatron to hide objects and items, condensing space to a finite point, disguising them visually as empty space. This is also said to be how Gitai carries all of its weapons around itself, which is a decent excuse for hammer space. The concept of condensing space is absolutely insane, and it's a fantastic science fiction concept which sees absolutely no play until the very end of the story. The sniper itself? An abysmal weapon that does little to no damage. It's the only weapon the enemies you fight don't share with you. The javelin has a real lack of utility from below, and its slow travel time makes it mostly useless outside of dumb luck. And Geyser is a thrown scattering of mines that traps the enemy for free damage, but environments aren't enclosed enough to allow it to be of much utility combined with a lack of range. The only range it would be useful automatically changes your subweapon use to a grab attempt, so it's not even worth trying. You'll never get hit with it either. Even the enemies can't find a good use for it. Halberd is an incredible yet unwieldy beam weapon with a very defined range. Enemy heads will use it at any range in order to zone and provide massive damage, as well as block oncoming burst attacks at long range. The recommended tactic? Flanking and using Halberd yourself. Knockback is vicious, so you can very easily get trapped, but the same is true for the enemies. For as much attention as the sub-weapon system gets, it's easy to forget that it exists after the first couple of disappointing power-ups, and the pressure from the limited ammunition system. Better power-ups are to come, and Halberd is simply one of the first. After the first EPS antenna is destroyed, there's a second near-identical area for the second EPS antenna, and a second batch of backtracking. The tunnels below the mountain are inaccessible. Gitai could pass through the microwave barrier just fine, but Ada might have trouble emptying a cockpit of the liquid children by herself. At this point, the game's become arbitrarily obtuse, neglecting to explain in any way how to progress. The answer is backtracking, again. This time to 3 different areas to obtain passcodes and programs. Combined with that, the game's difficulty increases with enemies that maneuver and actively flank you, along with acting in formations dictated by leaders, who can be destroyed on their own to lower the level of their squad. Perhaps too many training wheels were taken off at once, and very suddenly. This spike in difficulty with a lack of direction would be an unsurprising filter for players who A. don't have much time on their hands, B. are bad at the combat, or C. are bad at dealing with unclear goal structure, maybe any combination of these 3. This spike could have been leveled out a bit by protracting the game's events, and it would have helped the game's short length, but that likely would have required more content and a higher budget, or more backtracking. On the contrary, this difficulty spike isn't too grand, with the forgiving game over structure and the very lenient escape mechanics. Enemies are far too easily avoided, even when engaged. By disengaging lock-on and looking away, the enemies will forget that Gitai exists and go back on their patrol. Which is a shocking failure of a stealth system from Konami Computer Entertainment Japan. There may have been some intention to incentivize pacifism or help players out who accidentally get themselves into shitstorms by encountering several squads at once, but it reeks of poor design and utter unbelievability. I thought Gitai was meant to be their target. Nevertheless, this questionable string of fetch quests and directionlessness is an excellent chance for the game mechanics to actually breathe. The solution is to embrace the existing game routine. Look for passwords and see what those passwords give you. The true goal here is to hijack an enemy Raptor and use it to destroy the second antenna. And where do you find that Raptor? Let's ask Salvis.
I think I saw one somewhere.
Thanks. But don't worry, it's exactly where the sniper was. 2 fetch quests with the same place to backtrack in a row. At least the experience of playing as a Raptor is interesting enough. There are artificial stakes placed when Ada refers to herself in the third person, saying that Jehoti's AI will become damaged if the Raptor is destroyed. As the Raptor, you get an incredible sense of exactly how much work went into making Jehoti feel absolutely perfect. The Raptor is stiff, unexpressive and restrictive, and relatively powerless. It's welcome when you finally return to Jehoti. With that backtracking behind us and a few SOS missions completed, Ada inconspicuously points out where she was created.
I detect a high-energy reaction ahead.
Too late!
I deduce it to be a Raptor type. I can give you 13 different clear-cut reasons if you wish me to.
Ada, what are you talking about?
Your irrational actions have driven this frame into a crisis.
They have managed to learn Jehoti's guardian principles.
The enemy is a Raptor, named for the category of bird of prey. The vulture and its ability to see far and wide was a coveted focus in the religious minds of the ancient Egyptians. Known as the Pharaoh's chicken, it had ties to Isis, the goddess of... Now, you may not have noticed, but there's much thematic Egyptian mythology sampled to create the game's aesthetic. The main menu screen uses circuit boards overlaying hieroglyphics, for example. The IP's logo is an inverse pyramid shape with one central disc and small atomic beats along a set of concentric circles. The assumption is that these are the Sun and 4 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars, the latter 2 important to the canon of Z.O.E, even though neither are seen in this game, as we're orbiting Jupiter. The visual of an atom may also be relevant to the series' themes of humanity utilizing incredible power. The logo creates the shape of a polygonal eye with a very detailed iris and pupil, bringing to mind the concept of the Eye of Horus. This eye seems ambiguous as to its orientation. Horus's eye is depicted with the right eye, and a left eye would represent Thoth, or Jehoti, the arbitrator of divine disputes, representing wisdom. Ada does indeed take this role in the story, although it might be a bit ironic that a naive child is piloting it. The Egyptian motif was likely chosen as it holds a mysterious, foreign intrigue, and most known Egyptian mythology revolves around the concept of death and the afterlife. Every character in this game revolves around death. Leo is coming to terms with it, Salvis resents it, and Viola embraces it. Most of Ada and Leo's arguments are the result of their differing concepts of life's value. Ada now is stricken with a virus from piloting the Raptor, and there's still SOS missions to struggle through despite death now being a single hit away. These multiple likely game overs are punctuated by the wild screamings of children, cutting to black before Jehoti explodes. When removed from the game's rough voiceovers and awful story pacing, there is an essence of a very pure and excellent game narrative with strong themes and consideration. It's a terrible shame there's so many distractions in the way of what could have truly been a beloved classic. But unfortunately, Z.O.E 1 now resides in the shadow of its sequel, regarded as both a failure and a footnote. And whilst I love the game, that assessment is unfortunately right. Ada had warned Leo that it was a danger to jack the Raptor previously, even though it was out of necessity. Leo should have been more careful where he input his cockpit. He can only blame himself for this infection. It's time to go back to Ada's crib and fix her up. Most peculiarly, as a result, Ada expresses apologetics. The characters started to break. The idea of a genuine artificial intelligence, regardless of how ruthless it is or how mundane its relegation, being capable of developing mind-altering infections is horrifying. What might be more disturbing is that this more human streak in Ada's personality had been maybe suppressed by some module, now deleted. Augmented AI slavery doesn't really sit well with me. There's one last SOS mission amidst this, in which the entire colony is at stake. I wouldn't bring it up in favor of time if not for the weight of it. This is a central pillar and strut of the entire colony, helping it maintain stability in its orbit around Jupiter. The survivors you're merited against here are the entire colony. Upon failure, Ada calmly describes that within 48 months, the colony will crash into one of Jupiter's moons. Leo really believably falls apart here, and Salvis tries to comfort him. There's no emotional conclusion, everything is left hanging.
No, damn it! No! Leo, I'm sad too, but we still have things to do.
Then, if you make your way further into the game before the mountains, there'll be a definitive game over and a bad ending. If you've saved since then, your game will be ruined, and in a worst case scenario, you'll have to start everything over again. It's really kind of impressive. It's really a brave move that I can respect. If you fuck up too hard, the game no longer respects your progress at all. This is an intentional soft lock. But I guess that's what you get for not rotating your saves. There's more backtracking. This is the third backtracking fetch quest. Let's hit the fucking bullet points. Looking for a new driver to activate another module to fight the boss. Go back to Town 3. Leo finds stealth raptors. He's self-assured they have the passcode. Why? Go back to EPS2 and destroy your X-Raptor to see the new stealth raptors. Go back to Town 3 again, destroy the stealth raptors to obtain 1 of 2 passcodes. Go back to City 2 to get 2 of 2 passcodes. Go back to Factory 2 to obtain the new decoy driver for the new weapon decoy. Destroy 20 porters to get ammo. Reload the map, farm ammo for the boss battle. And then you get this genuinely great boss battle against Tyrant, where you use decoy to create easy openings on the first phase. After that point, he develops incredible maneuverability, meaning that you have to functionally be a 3D bullfighter. Since melee attacks are never viable against frames of this size, the camera work focusing on the enemy emphasizes their scale, while the destructible elements zoom between you. This effectively makes Jehuti the foreground, the buildings the middle ground, and Tyrant the background. And having a character become the background entirely would be something later mastered in Shadow of the Colossus' camera work. The area looks a little plain, but it's understandable. This is meant to be a park. Unfortunately, the team didn't seem to have a knack for uncommon topology. As the cockpit ejects, Ada comments that she wouldn't bother to ask Leo to fire on the fleeing enemy. She says he's unreasonable, but she understands his principle. This is a very subtle change. She's still embedded in a very unromantic language, but there's a stint of sympathy that's coming out. You know what? Why does backtracking suck? Because the answer's not obvious. Returning to the same area again isn't in and of itself bad. You've surely replayed the same game in your life voluntarily, or replayed one mission in a game several times over to try and perfect your craft. Speedrunners create a career out of this pursuit of perfection. And not all backtracking is bad either. Sometimes it reinforces narrative themes, sometimes it makes a place feel more alive by reminding you that despite all the loading zones, the world is being constructed very carefully to inhabit Euclidean space, helping you construct a natural map of the game's world in your mind. Sometimes, those areas you go back to will have new, interesting challenges. It's also the largest amount of uninterrupted gameplay most games will see. Therefore, not all backtracking sucks. There's huge advantages, not just budgetary, to allowing the player to stew in existing assets. But Zone of the Ender's backtracking is, in fact, bad. The encounter structure means that those new challenges are rarely met. The new challenges themselves aren't new enemies, just enemies set to a harder mode. Increasing time efficiency of play in an area will often mean entirely reducing the amount of interaction with enemies, meaning you're not playing the best parts of the game. Even if you choose engagement, most of the combat takes place over the area above the floor for maximum maneuverability, and the only area that gives the game true verticality isn't a mandatory revisit. The areas you fight in don't have much of an effect on the gameplay. The overworld and excellently rendered backgrounds within each area already provide a sense of larger spatial awareness. Even areas where SOS missions have taken place burning from afar, the world already feels vibrant and alive, and the SOS missions providing optional revisitation of areas was enough to give a sense that time passes, and events happen on the colony regardless of your interaction. And at a lack of any interesting gameplay tweaks, there's also no story content at all during these backtracking segments. The only thing that Zone of the Enders gained with this poor scenario design was playtime, which it was sorely lacking. But instead of curing the problem of a lack of content, they made it far worse by drawing attention to the weakness. The next area beyond the mountains is the best part of the game, unless you've destroyed the colony, in which case it's game over. We're reintroduced to a woman who hasn't talked to Leo since the introduction, and we somehow figure out a way to make a man called Rock Thunderheart boring. It's about now that Leo's finally cottoned on that he's a child in a giant robot, and he takes serious issue with being told to fight more and more, having his boundaries pushed more and more. Till the subject of the original pilot comes up. Everyone gets offended because he was this woman's boyfriend. The moment elucidates for Leo that everyone has value for human life. Nobody's happy about the situation they're in, but they have purpose. They're fighting because of that value that they have. The inherent irony isn't lost on them, that they're treating lives unequally according to allegiance, but this is the corner that reality has backed them into, just like Leo. The mountainous region is immediately creepy. The music is eerie and tense. The maze of Valley's largest detours holds some of the best extras. Every 10 to 20 seconds of fresh ground covered, you encounter a new wave of enemies complete with a complete refresh of health, and you're caged in with them. This gauntlet reuses the mountain assets for roughly 2 areas in different configurations, and it feels great. There's no need to backtrack or make more assets so long as you can remix those assets and create interesting gameplay. The narrow valleys mean the arsenal of subweapons you've amassed may gain more valuable purpose, But the question is why you would use most of them, when the boundary is effectively a burst volley without the charge time. It even homes and bounces. Well, you'd probably save it for the upcoming boss fights. With Leo's sense of moral justification falling apart and his fortitude dilapidating, it's only fitting that the mountainous regions reveal something that should have been obvious from the start. The world, as well realized as it is, as believable as it is, as well laid out and well established in time and space as the entire game's efforts have tried to ensure you, as many people who have lived and died in this world, it is entirely a fabrication. There's a dam which conducts no power, because there's no river behind it. There's rock formations which were likely formed by hand. The entire colony may well have been created simply to produce Gitai and Anubis, and provide a home for those working on it. The world is so well made that you forget about all of this, and the realization comes back as a shock. Only now is it revealed to match Leo's own character development. His own concept of the world is faltering. His own beliefs are a carefully constructed lie. It's become continuously more difficult for him to justify to himself that killing is always wrong, and that soldiers merely have no hearts. And we meet our final of the huge boss fights in a circular dam, where the game strays the hardest into 3D bullet hell it ever will. There's beam patterns, homing bullets, add-ons. The only downside of the amazing designs of each of these mechs is that they're all used in very similar uncreative ways. They all charge in some way or another, their beams don't have a unique pattern for any logical reason, and their attacks tend to home in. They're still incredibly enjoyable. They remix timings and pacing very well, but once that sense that they had no budget or time creeps into your mind, you start to see the constraints everywhere. Leo, Ada, and Salvise delve deeper behind the curtain of their colony and the unnature surrounding it. Viola's obsession with Leo has only grown. Being a character whose entire entity revolves around death, it's ironic that her orbital frame is named Neith, the goddess of mothers and childbirth. Though it's fitting that she also represents water now that we've entered the back of the dam. Target Alpha is secured, and her commander feels great. But all she cares for is Leo. In some ways to her, Leo represents new blood, life, and his obsessive courtesy towards life directly conflict with Viola's stagnant resentment towards it. And indeed, to Leo, Viola is the embodiment of death itself. Something he can't come to terms with, something he can't accept, and something he refuses to allow at every opportunity. They are diametric opposites, and it's only natural they would collide. And collide they do. This fight is so good. It's so good. The music is the perfect amount of chaotic unease that matches this game so well at its fastest pace. The game starts to remove the limitations of the AI and force you to use more diverse and desperate tactics due to the speed and ferocity with which Viola engages you. We finally have environments with completely third-dimensional level design to complement the third-dimensional movement. The cover collapses on impact and the action is so fucking vigorous. She's unstoppable, but so are you, dodging in and out of each other's ranges and trading blows. Ada will never stop telling you how much damage this fight is doing to the surroundings. She's the equivalent frame to yours, the only difference is experience. The music blares with a quite pleasing siren that doesn't cut the ears, but still gets the pulse running. The movement is so constant the camera rarely gets an opportunity to realign with gravity. Your goddamn burst attacks can collide with each other. Look at this Dragon Ball shit! This is what Zone of the Enders could have been. This is what we should have had. This is the game engine and the combat system stressed to its limits in a one-on-one brawl. But before the fight can truly get going, Viola captures you. Everything's lost. Ada puts an eject command on the pause menu. There's no other option. Except Leo says no. Not even the player says no. Leo does. Because that's not what we're playing. Ada very aptly points out that he's putting real human beings, himself and Salvise, in dire danger. But Ada failed to consider that he considers her alive too. This darkly calculated machine that has no value in human life is also something to be valued in itself. Leo escapes, and the fight gets even more fucking relentless! The movement between you becomes so frenetic, the only remaining frame of reference you can quickly adapt to is Viola at all times. She interrupts your combos, she zones you. It's amazing! It's so satisfying when you finally take her down. This win has been earned. After you beat the game, a full 2-player mode is unlocked, and there's more to unlock with the true ending. This is why I borrow so much terminology from fighting games when I talk about the gameplay. This mode deserves way more than I'll give it here, but just know, this camera system somehow really works. It seems as though Leo seriously wounded Viola herself in the cockpit. Her frame is disabled, motionless. All that's left is the killing blow.
I will! Why did you stop? What's with you?
Viola can't comprehend this amount of aversion to murder. Everything she wants is at the hands of a child who sobs and refuses to follow through. This is the truest test. She killed his friends, practically exists emanating the scent of death. All she can do is kill, all she can do is destroy, and yet Leo will even leave Viola alive. He can't quite push himself to make that final judgment call and kill another human being. He views it as sinking to a moral low, but Viola looks upon it as weakness. The truth is somewhere in between. You could do without crying though. Ada also takes issue with Leo's actions of not ejecting. More than berating him, she struggles to express her thoughts. Ada stutters and thinks through her wording carefully, calling herself a lifeless program and falling back on calling Leo illogical. For Leo, he's moved past his cowardice and his inaction. He's successfully matured into a position where he can risk himself willingly. I really like this moment. The expansion of Ada's humanity is subtle and constrained by a logical disposition. Her only language is based in rules, and her only conclusion can be human error, even if her emotions are clearly more complex, and at some level she's grateful to have been saved. Rock Thunderheart, this boring asshole, has one last mission for Leo: to do his job for him. Barham's plot has changed. With one target attained and Viola failing to salvage or destroy Gitai, the only thing that remains is the nuclear option. The colony will be scuttled, unless someone can disarm the bombs in the central transportation unit. Why doesn't Rock Thunderheart do it himself? Because this child is a better pilot. His name is Rock Thunderheart, and he's giving Gitai to this whiny kid who is encouraged to avoid combat at every corner because he's a child with no combat experience. He doesn't even want to pilot the rad mech. Selvice has more balls than these two. She has to coax Leo into this yet again, promising she'll sit in his cockpit again. Selvice is pure beyond concept, because that's all she is. Pacifistic. Viola Sephiroth Selvice, and Rock Thunderheart confirms to the viewer why he has no business holding a gun, much less using a mech.
You need this done to you.
Only now that the symbol of pure pacifism is being dispatched is there justification to take everything possible to Viola. I don't know if we needed a flashback to 10 seconds ago though, of Selvice saying Leo will protect her. To Leo, Viola's more than made a point. If he doesn't take her life, she will continue to destroy his. This isn't Saturday morning. She's not Team Rocket's Scratch Grounder or Butch and Skull. Every life you spare is another one lost. That's the only way you can justify murder to yourself. And in the narrative of Leo's maturation, it nearly mirrors this. Viola, a woman who emanates and invites death in every aspect of her backstory and attitude, has killed off the purest example of pacifism in his story. Leo needed this done to him. All of his established character faults have now left. All that remains to be done is to face his fear of death. En route, Ada asks Leo to talk like the co-workers or something. As always, she's the life of the party. 8% chance of survival, baby. We're building up to some tension for a rather difficult section of the game, so that's fine. The real essence of this scene is an analysis of Leo's character, whilst implicating Ada's evolution by expressing her curiosity. She truly fails at understanding human emotion, whilst lightly expressing it herself. Her hard calculations and criticism of Leo's lack of logical consistency ends up with her admitting that she doesn't want him to die. She's a paradox herself. It's brilliantly confused. Perhaps she restrains the analysis of her own being from Leo, or perhaps she's unaware of herself. Assuming the latter is true, there's a kind of beauty in that. The very evidence of her self-consciousness is a lack of self-awareness. Leo takes the opportunity to tell his backstory. His strained relationship with his parents, caused by their rigorous work schedules, left him an only child raising himself mostly. When his father was stationed at Jupiter, he recalls one rare family dinner where the parents were fighting over custody.
They weren't arguing to get me. They both wanted to get rid of me.
The absolute lack of build-up to this comes off like a joke. Leo goes on to say he's always felt unwanted in his life, and nobody would even be sad if he died. The reason he stays in Gitai is because he's needed there. he has comrades and direction. Zone of the Ender's final sin, truly, is the burden of unobfuscated unoriginality. From the beginning, there were very obvious influences from general mech anime tropes. Most clearly, Leo and his obsession over his father, who never turns up. The depictions of space colonial independence are almost directly taken from Gundam, in fact, with slight differences to locations, motives, and inciting incidents. Now, the direct Evangelion influences have arrived, where Leo, like Shinji, is translating a family structure to his command structure. There's many differing elements though, with some gravity given to his development when the game opens on child death, along with some stronger writing around different core themes. Overall, the game's structure is taken very directly from Metal Gear. You have the cold open, an emphasis on pacifism and stealth mechanics, single-use weapons acquired for single-time scenarios, offensive quantities of backtracking followed by a naked section, before a final stretch of escalating back-to-back action, interjected with strong cutscenes, with a villain whom you fight against thrice, and a final escape section after the climactic boss battle. There is a really great story here, and a great game. The story in the game goes somewhat intentionally at odds in places with an unusual atmosphere of horror. Quality emotional investment comes from these opposing forces. The gameplay is incredibly unique, but the structure it's within is so clearly shoddy and borrowed that it poisons the mind with feelings of wasted time and unoriginality despite the overall good experience. The story shows a young boy's development into adolescence, his maturing to the concept of mortality, and also the negative development when he's accidentally groomed into being a child soldier, because the military is a more welcoming home to him now than his lost family or his friends ever were. He develops a sense of purpose in the worst place. But that's also hidden amongst so many borrowed plot elements from its contemporaries that all the unique and well-executed greatness is dismissed before consideration. And when you drop those into a game with abysmal pacing and at times comedically awful direction, with half of its story locked behind an OVA, Zone of the Ender's unfortunate failure becomes a given. This is the Autopsy report. We're not even at the ending, but most players would have fallen 2 hours in. The SOS missions and the extensive backtracking chains are more than enough. And then there's a bad ending that can get rid of all of your progress, and difficulties now spiking beyond the solar system without proper preparation. This was a game that would never ever have its name alongside its contemporaries which it stole so much from. Even then, I want to fight in this game's core and tell you that it's more than it might seem, because I do think it's a worthwhile experience. Just for the ending, I want you to forget all of those unsubtle homages, and I want you to enjoy Zone of the Enders with me for what it truly achieves.
I am incapable of feeling sorrow, but do not throw your life away so easily.
I understand. Thank you.
In contrast to Ada's statement, Viola waits amidst the bombs. If Leo were to fail his mission, surely she would die too. But there she waits, hoping for one last fight, disobeying even her commanding officer to see this through. The area is swarming with enemies. There is no escape. They're in as high a variation as you'll ever see them. After one bomb is neutralized, 10 seconds pass before the next appears. It's a simple situation, but the mixture of enemy types is unbalanced. There are mummy heads, raptors, cyclops of the highest AI levels. So when you do make a panicked engagement, there's often no safe zone, and you can't maintain one position for too long lest you get swarmed. The running only buys you so much time, almost barely enough to defuse a bomb. Bombs are defused by grabbing and holding for 5 seconds. Grabs take priority automatically at short range no matter what subweapon you hold. Be careful not to accidentally shoot the bomb. Be careful not to let the bomb get hit by enemy fire. Be careful not to grab an enemy instead of the bomb and throw them into it. Be careful not to let go of the bomb, because you'll volley it and it will explode. There's commitment to Diffusal, and under the time limit there'll be many panicked attempts that will get you destroyed. This is another example of Gitai performing a job that it's just not equipped to do. It's pretty much the most extreme variant of this theme through the game, and you will defuse each bomb just moments before taking an attack that could have lost you the section. It's some of the best combat with some of the best pressure in the game. Those who hated the SOS missions will likely think this is the worst part of the game. What the fuck do they know? This is absolutely exhilarating, and it really whets the appetite for one last boss fight. Viola's deformed mech appears, holding its crumbling self together. She only chuckles. The zoning has improved, unleashing volleys of attacks if you care to approach. Up close she swings her tendrils towards you and grabs you with them. You can only properly attack her when she's whiffed one of these attacks, and you can only approach if you avoid her bullet hell. The true essence of the game at its purest is in full effect, moving in and out, finding openings, choosing where on the field you'll attack from, how much time you have to accomplish it in, and how much commitment those will have based on blocks or whiffs. The fight is somewhat horrifying in concept. We've amplified this horror atmosphere, and a boss theme develops electronically distorted operatic vocals. She piles on the pressure using everything she's got, barely holding herself together physically, and likely mentally too. She's bleeding out in the cockpit and she's still going this far. It's the best. It's so intense, it's so atmospheric, so haunting but involved. So many decisions you make in a second could mean death. Every swing you make a commitment that will be taken advantage of if you haven't placed it carefully. Every second you leave yourself opened is enough to be stun-locked. Paying attention to the distance context of your lock-on to see what variant of your attacks are available to you. Laying down covering fire to apply pressure and deny options. Spending sub-weapons to find the correct answer. Making use of every trick you've depended upon the entire game when diving into combat. The essence of this game is in the struggle to control space and enemy options, when you're both hypermobile, and how the enemy tries to control you. This is Zone of the Ender's apex in terms of gameplay, the climax of everything this game system promises and offers. Finally, Leo defeats the monstrosity of Viola. In free happenstance, this leaves her adrift toward Jupiter and assuredly death. Leo has killed Viola. Once again, Leo tries to extend Giti's capabilities beyond its designation, asking Ada for options on saving her. But no, Viola denies help. She's lived a long and troubled life, surrounded by death. Everyone who's ever mattered to her died, the only person she loved too. Radam's final moments in delusion, his actions resembling an act of suicide, which they may well have been. Her own inability to reproduce and create life. All she could do was create death. Comrades, women, children, all in an effort to perpetuate her own disgusting existence. In some ways, this one big, long, extended shot of Viola slowly breaking up into the atmosphere is satisfying. But for Leo, it's many other things. The first real intended kill, putting to sleep one last worry. Some sorrow and probably respect for someone in their final moments. Thematically, it's the fear of death that he's finally conquered. Leo has escaped all of his character flaws and come full circle. Telling her that she was truly the strongest opponent he ever faced, she's satisfied, and she joins Radam in the afterlife. But, can you really overcome the fear of death?
What is it? What's going on? Ada?
I detect an enemy presence behind us.
Anubis, implied to be the target A to Giti's B, Egyptian god of death in the afterlife, protector of tombs, guider of souls, weigher of hearts. Ada used the term destined to say that you shouldn't meet yet. Not Giti and Anubis, no. You two, as in the pilot and Leo. It's the only time she has ever used any mythological language. As Leo tries to accuse the mysterious pilot of ordaining this invasion, he teleports away. Announces his killing intent, and interrupts the cutscene to teleport in and attack you. He's disobeying the rules of basic courtesy and game design, in not even giving the player a moment to prepare. He just starts the fight. Ada's broken character entirely. The soundtrack is the main menu's reverberated backwards Japanese lyrics, but with ethnic wailing in the background. This is not upbeat. This isn't action. This isn't even action in the guise of horror. The game has just devolved into a struggle for survival. In a game where controlling the distance between you and the opponent is life and death, Anubis can teleport at its convenience. Anubis, using vector traps to control literal space, is using it to control figurative space, moving instantaneously and avoiding damage by compressing himself momentarily. You can't hit Anubis with your attacks because he's spot dodging your attacks. There's no control, there's no escaping. You can only avoid it, but not forever. Superiority index has dropped to minus 99.83. 15 more seconds of dodging death until escape. Tragically, all Leo has done is removed his fear of creating death. Viola may have exemplified mortality itself, but she was not mortality herself. You can't just kill someone and pretend you've conquered death. In fact, nothing can awaken your fear of mortality more than someone dying by your own hands, much less right in front of you. How simple it is to enact and how simple it would be for you to go the same way. His only option is to escape. The virus situation was a tutorial for accepting escape in a situation of overwhelming odds, and it returns now with some establishment. After getting bailed out by his leaving party, Leo guides himself in for a clean landing, Anubis made unable to follow thanks to the covering fire. Leo and Ada get time to talk. They've bonded, come closer, and met in the middle on many topics. They've both grown a lot in this short time. Leo asks for her future plans as if she might be able to get out of the cockpit as well. It's almost like he's trying to ask her out. Ada informs the child that her mission on Mars, which he delivered her for, is a suicide mission. She will detonate to destroy the fortress Owlman on the Martian surface. Z.O.E will explode with 3 times the power of every nuke combined on Earth today. It would re-desolate and disinhabit the planet. Everyone will die. Suddenly, Bahram's actions to destroy the colony don't seem so absurd now. Ada told Leo not to throw his life away, maybe because she understands her own fate. How valuable it is when you have a choice in the matter.
This is what I live for. This is the purpose of living. For those who have no life.
Not only is he still able to die, but so will Ada, one day, inevitably. It was never so simple. I love the way Leo's character is paved through to hit the very heart of his personality flaws, to a very morbid consideration of death evasion for everyone including himself. But all you can really make easier is killing. Even in Viola's case, she was suicidal to a point, but still regretted seeing her loved ones die. Even when people hate themselves, they don't hate everyone around. And even if you could argue that Leo was acting to save Ada in escaping from Anubis, Leo still cares for Ada, and Ada can still die. Solvise made it through a Sephiroth thing at least, thanks to Rock Thunderheart. Without any backstory of her own, she remains nothing more than a symbolic character to the end, and her life hanging in the balance was representative of the stakes of the final confrontation. Had she died, it would have shown Leo, like RADAM, didn't have an ideal strong enough to prevent himself from turning completely dark. Sometimes you have to kill people in order to protect your loved ones. RADAM protected his loved ones, but ended up losing that ideal accidentally. Viola fought because all she had was death. She's terribly similar to Ada in a way, but Ada becomes reformed, for better or worse. Leo came out of the scenario still caring for human life, and still holding on to the valid ideal, despite it being put to the harshest test. The strongest writing a story can have is placing a protagonist's values against the strongest odds, to explore if they can survive. What we learn is that accepting death is as good as a disregard for life. And although death is ever present, it can never be a positive outcome. Part of human struggle is caring for one's own life and others, and that requires philosophically counterintuitive means, like killing. It's a brutal message from a brutal game. The story of Zone of the Enders until the very end remains with an empty, unfinished feeling, as if it were the beginning of an intended series of episodic games. This implicit route was never taken. Beyond the cliffhanger of Ada's mission, many plot threads remain open about Leo's father, his own choices and further development into maturity, Bahram's future, Anubis, and Antilia. Most of these never get addressed directly in any sequel. Antilia never returns. Solvise never returns. Leo never returned to his father, nor Z.O.E's cockpit. The director of Z.O.E, Zone of the Enders, never returned.